The winter air bit sharply as snowflakes swirled against the frosted windows of the cabin. The landscape outside was a pristine blanket of white, untouched and glistening under the faint light of a rising moon. Inside, the warmth from the crackling fireplace filled the cozy living room, where Logan sat on the couch, a steaming mug of cocoa cradled between his hands. He watched as his stepsister, Callie, moved through the room, her presence both familiar and strangely captivating. The cabin was their parents' idea, a family bonding trip in the mountains before the chaos of spring. But tonight, the place felt too quiet, too intimate, as the wind howled outside like a distant warning. Callie settled into an armchair by the fire, her book in hand, though Logan noticed her eyes weren't on the pages. She seemed restless, her gaze flickering toward him every now and then, as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The two of them had never been particularly close. Callie was reserved, often lost in her own world of art and literature, while Logan was the adventurous type, always chasing the next thrill. When their parents married 7 years ago, they had been polite but distant, finding it easier to coexist without delving into each other's lives. Yet something about this trip, this snowbound isolation, had started to shift the air between them. "Quiet night," Logan said, his voice breaking the stillness. Callie looked up, startled, as if she'd been pulled from her thoughts. "Yeah," she replied softly. "Almost too quiet." Logan smirked, leaning back against the couch. "You mean boring?" She rolled her eyes, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Not everything has to be an adrenaline rush, Logan." "True," he admitted, his tone light. "But you can't tell me you don't feel a little trapped out here." Callie closed her book, folding her legs beneath her. "Isn't that the point of this trip? To get away from everything? Phones, distractions, people." Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, the firelight danced between them, filling the silence with its quiet crackle. Logan studied her, noticing the way her auburn hair caught the golden light, the way her lips pursed when she was lost in thought. He had never paid much attention before, but something about this moment felt different, charged. He looked away quickly, taking a sip of his cocoa as if to steady himself. "You okay?" Callie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Logan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I should be asking you that. You've been zoning out all day." "I guess I've just been thinking a lot," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the fire. "About everything. This trip. Us. How much has changed since the first time we came here?" Logan's brows furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Callie hesitated, her fingers brushing against the edge of her book. "I don't know. It's just different now. We're not the same people we were back then." Her words hung in the air, and Logan felt a strange tension settle between them. She wasn't wrong. They had grown, matured in ways neither of them had fully acknowledged. But hearing her say it out loud made something stir inside him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. "You're right," he said after a moment. "We've changed. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." Callie looked at him, her eyes searching his face as though trying to read his thoughts. For a fleeting moment, the space between them felt smaller, more intimate, as if the walls of the cabin were closing in, forcing them to confront the unfamiliar connection growing between them. Then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, Callie shifted in her chair, breaking eye contact. "We should get some sleep," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's going to be a long day tomorrow." Logan nodded, though a part of him didn't want the night to end. "Yeah, you're probably right." As Callie stood and disappeared into the hallway leading to her room, Logan stared into the fire, his thoughts swirling like the snowstorm outside. Something had changed between them tonight, something he couldn't ignore, and deep down, he wondered if Callie had felt it too. The storm raged on through the night, and by morning, the world outside the cabin was buried in a thick layer of snow. Logan stood by the window, his breath fogging up the glass as he peered out at the blinding whiteness. He had planned to hit the slopes today, but the snowstorm had other ideas. Instead, he found himself stuck in the cabin with Callie, their parents having left early for a day trip to the nearby town. "Looks like we're snowed in," Logan muttered, turning away from the window. Callie was seated at the dining table, a mug of tea warming her hands as she scribbled in her sketch pad. She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "Guess we'll have to make the most of it." Logan smirked, running a hand through his messy dark hair. "And by make the most of it, you mean sitting in silence while you draw and I stare out the window?" Callie rolled her eyes, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "Maybe you should try it sometime. Staring out the window is very meditative." "Sure, if you're into that sort of thing," he teased, crossing the room to sit across from her. His curiosity got the better of him, and he tilted his head to see what she was working on. "What are you drawing?" Callie hesitated, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. She rarely shared her art with anyone, least of all Logan. But something about the way he asked, genuine, without the usual sarcasm, made her slide the sketch pad toward him. Logan's eyes widened slightly as he took in the intricate details of her drawing. It was a scene from the previous night, the fireplace glowing, the shadows of the room casting an almost ethereal quality over the furniture. In the center, she had drawn two figures, their faces illuminated by the firelight. "Is that us?" Logan asked, his voice quieter now. Callie nodded, her cheeks tinged with pink. "I don't know why I drew it. It felt like a moment worth capturing." Logan studied the sketch for a long moment, his usual playful demeanor replaced by something more introspective. "You're really talented. You know that." "Thanks," Callie said softly, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting second before she looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the table. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it was heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of them seemed ready to address. Logan leaned back in his chair, his gaze still lingering on the sketch. "You know," he began, his tone lighter now, "if we're stuck here all day, we might as well do something fun." Callie raised an eyebrow. "Like what? Build a snowman in a blizzard?" Logan laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "I was thinking more like a movie marathon. Unless you'd rather sit here and draw me all day." Callie smirked, finally relaxing. "Don't flatter yourself. I've already got enough material." They settled onto the couch, a stack of DVDs piled on the coffee table. The first movie started, and for a while, it was easy to fall into the rhythm of old routines, playful banter, shared laughter, the kind of casual closeness that had once been so natural between them. But as the hours passed, that underlying tension began to creep back in. Callie became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, the way Logan's arm occasionally brushed against hers. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, and it made her pulse quicken in a way she didn't fully understand. When the third movie ended, Logan stretched, his arm brushing against Callie's shoulder. She glanced at him, her heart racing as she caught the way his gaze lingered on her for just a moment too long. "Want to take a break?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Sure," Callie replied, her throat suddenly dry. She stood, smoothing her sweater as she moved toward the kitchen. "I'll make some tea." Logan followed her, leaning casually against the counter as she filled the kettle. "You've been quiet," he observed. "What's on your mind?" Callie hesitated, her hands stilling on the kettle. She could feel his eyes on her, the weight of his presence making it impossible to focus. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just thinking about the snowstorm." Logan didn't reply right away, and when she finally looked at him, She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name, but felt all the same. "You know," he said slowly, his tone thoughtful, "I don't think it's just the snowstorm that's got you distracted." Callie's breath caught, her pulse pounding in her ears. "What are you talking about?" Logan took a step closer, his expression serious now. "You feel it too, don't you? This thing between us." Her heart raced, a mix of panic and curiosity swirling inside her. She wanted to deny it, to brush off his words as some kind of joke, but the look in his eyes told her he was serious. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaky. Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Come on, Callie. We've both felt it. And pretending it's not there isn't going to make it go away." Callie's hands tightened around the edge of the counter as she tried to process his words. The truth was, she had felt it, the growing tension, the unspoken connection, but admitting it felt like stepping into dangerous territory. "Logan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we can't—" "I know," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "I know it's complicated, but I also know that whatever this is, it's real, and maybe it's time we stop pretending it's not." For a moment, they just stood there, the silence between them heavy with possibilities. Callie's mind raced, torn between the safety of denial and the terrifying allure of what Logan was offering. The kettle whistled, breaking the spell. Callie turned quickly, pouring the boiling water into 2 mugs and handing one to Logan without meeting his eyes. "Let's just watch another movie," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Logan took the mug, his fingers brushing against hers. "Yeah," he said softly. "Okay." As they returned to the couch, the tension between them was palpable, an unspoken truth lingering in the air. Callie sipped her tea, her thoughts swirling as she tried to ignore the way Logan's gaze seemed to follow her every move. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing about this snowbound cabin would ever feel the same again. The snowstorm showed no signs of letting up the next day. Callie woke to the muffled sound of wind howling outside and the faint warmth of sunlight filtering through the cabin's frosted windows. Her first thought was that their parents were still snowed out of returning, leaving her and Logan alone for yet another day. She stretched, her thoughts immediately flashing back to the tension that had lingered between them the previous evening. She shook her head, as if the motion could banish the memory. "This is ridiculous," she told herself. "There's nothing there. It's just cabin fever." The smell of coffee lured her out of her room. In the kitchen. Logan stood at the counter, pouring 2 mugs. He was already dressed in jeans and a hoodie, his hair still slightly tousled from sleep. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a small smile. "Coffee." "Thanks," Callie replied, accepting the mug he offered. Their fingers brushed, and she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the steam curling up from the cup. Logan leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on her as he sipped his coffee. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not entirely awkward either. "So," he said finally, his tone casual, "what's the plan for today? More movies? Or are you going to keep ignoring me while you sketch?" Callie rolled her eyes, grateful for the teasing note in his voice. "I wasn't ignoring you." "Sure you weren't?" Logan smirked, taking another sip of his coffee. "What were you drawing, anyway? Me again?" Callie flushed. "No," she said quickly, setting her mug down. "Just random stuff." "Right," he said, drawing the word out in that infuriatingly knowing way of his. She tried to change the subject. "What about you? What are you going to do all day?" Logan shrugged. "Depends. Are you going to keep avoiding me? Or are we actually going to talk? The lightheartedness in his tone didn't quite mask the seriousness in his eyes. Callie felt her stomach flip, the words catching in her throat. She wanted to laugh it off, to tease him back. But instead, she found herself staring into her coffee, unsure of how to respond. Before she could think of an answer, Logan set his mug down and took a step closer. Callie, he said softly, about last night. Logan, she interrupted quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. She met his gaze, determined to put an end to whatever this was. Can we not? Logan stopped, his expression unreadable. Not what? This, she said, gesturing vaguely between them. Whatever tension you think is here. It's not, we're just stuck in a cabin during a snowstorm, and it's making things weird. Logan crossed his arms, leaning back slightly as he studied her. So that's what you think this is? Cabin fever. What else would it be? She shot back, her voice rising slightly. We're step-siblings. Logan. We grew up together. There's nothing else it could be. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the faint whistle of the wind outside. Logan's gaze softened, and he uncrossed his arms, taking another step toward her. Callie, he said quietly, his tone gentle but firm. I'm not blind, and I'm not imagining things. You feel it too. You're just too scared to admit it. I don't feel anything, she insisted, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. And even if I did, it wouldn't matter. This is wrong. Why? Logan challenged, his voice rising slightly. Because we're step-siblings. Because people might judge us. Who cares? We're not even related. Callie shook her head, her throat tightening. It doesn't matter. It's still complicated. Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine, he said, his tone edged with frustration. If that's how you feel, I'll drop it. But don't expect me to pretend I don't care about you, because I do, more than I probably should. Before Callie could respond, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there with her coffee growing cold in her hands. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Callie threw herself into her sketching, trying to drown out the memory of Logan's words. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the way he had looked at her, the raw vulnerability in his voice when he said he cared about her. By evening, the cabin felt oppressively quiet. Callie sat on the couch, her sketchbook forgotten in her lap, as the wind howled outside. She had just decided to go to bed early when she heard Logan's footsteps approaching. Callie, he said softly, stopping a few feet away from her. Can we talk? For real this time? She looked up at him, her chest tightening at the expression on his face. He looked hesitant, vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to seeing. Okay, she said after a long moment, setting her sketchbook aside. Logan sat down beside her, leaving enough space between them to feel respectful, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. I'm sorry, he began, his voice low. I didn't mean to push you earlier. I've been holding this in for a while, and being stuck here with you, it's made everything harder to ignore. Callie swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Logan, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, I'll respect your boundaries. But I couldn't keep pretending I don't feel this way. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. Logan, she said softly. This is complicated and scary. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to ruin what we have. We won't, he said firmly. I promise. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. Then, slowly, tentatively, Logan reached out and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and steady, and despite her doubts, Callie found herself squeezing his hand in return. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's figure this out. Together." Logan smiled, a mixture of relief and happiness lighting up his face. "Together," he agreed. As they sat there, hand in hand, the snowstorm outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet warmth of the moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Callie knew they would face them together. The days after their quiet conversation brought a noticeable shift in the air between Callie and Logan. It was subtle at first, like the soft hum of electricity before a storm. They tried to maintain the comfortable rhythm of their friendship, but every shared glance and fleeting touch carried an undeniable weight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Callie sat on the edge of the porch, her knees pulled to her chest. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the warm breeze tousled her hair. She stared out at the vast meadow stretching before her, lost in thought. Logan stepped outside, his footsteps soft against the wooden planks. He paused when he saw her, silhouetted by the fading sunlight. "Mind some company?" he asked, his voice low. Callie glanced over her shoulder, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Always." Logan settled down beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers as he stretched his legs out in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. The crickets sang their nightly tune, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of summer. "You always come out here to think?" Logan said, breaking the silence. "What's on your mind?" Callie shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I guess I like the quiet. It makes everything feel manageable." Logan chuckled softly, the sound warm and familiar. "Yeah, I get that." They fell into silence again, but it was far from empty. Callie could feel Logan's eyes on her, and when she turned to meet his gaze, her breath caught. His expression was different. Not playful or teasing as it often was, but serious, thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan hesitated, running a hand through his hair before speaking. "Callie, He stopped, exhaling heavily. "I don't know how to say this without complicating everything." Her heart quickened, a nervous thrill coursing through her. "Just say it," she encouraged, though her own voice trembled. Logan shifted closer, his knee brushing against hers. "I care about you," he said, his tone earnest. "More than I probably should." Callie's stomach flipped at his words, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Logan," she started, but the look in his eyes stopped her. "I know it's not simple," he continued, his voice steady. "But I can't ignore how I feel anymore. I just needed to say it." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Callie's mind raced, torn between the boundaries they'd built and the connection that had grown undeniable. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. "Logan," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "This is complicated, but I feel it too." The moment hung suspended between them, heavy with unspoken words and simmering emotions. Logan's eyes searched hers, a silent question lingering in their depths. Callie felt her breath hitch as she nodded ever so slightly, giving him the permission he seemed to need. He leaned in again, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was no longer tentative. This time, it was filled with hunger, a rawness that neither of them had dared to reveal before. Callie melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. His arms circled her waist, anchoring her to him as the world outside the porch dissolved into irrelevance. The warmth of his touch sent shivers down her spine as his hands roamed her back, fingers brushing against bare skin where her tank top had ridden up. The feel of his calloused hands was both electrifying and soothing, a paradox she couldn't get enough of. When his lips moved from hers to trail down her jawline, a soft sigh escaped her, lost in the night air. "Callie?" Logan murmured against her neck, his voice rough with emotion. The way he said her name made her heart race, each syllable filled with reverence and longing. "Logan?" she breathed, tilting her head to give him better access. The gentle press of his lips against her throat ignited a fire within her, spreading through her body like an unstoppable blaze. She felt his hand slide beneath her top, his touch warm and confident as it traced the curve of her waist. They barely made it inside the house, their movements a blur of urgency and tenderness. Logan guided her toward the couch, his hands never leaving her as he kissed her deeply. Callie's fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her impatience evident. He chuckled softly against her lips, the sound vibrating through her, before helping her finish the task. The shirt fell to the floor, forgotten. As her hands explored the planes of his chest, marveling at the strength beneath her fingertips, Logan pulled her closer, his lips finding hers once more as he laid her back against the cushions. The soft glow of the moonlight filtered through the windows, casting silver streaks across their entwined forms. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a promise, a declaration of something they could no longer deny. Callie's heart pounded as Logan's lips moved lower, tracing a path down her collarbone and to the edge of her top. Her breath hitched as he hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting hers in silent question. She responded by threading her fingers through his hair, her touch both tender and insistent. Their connection deepened with each passing moment, their movements fluid and intuitive as they explored the boundaries of their newfound intimacy. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their breaths, the intensity of their emotions filling the space like a tangible force. When they finally stilled, their bodies intertwined on the couch, the silence was anything but empty. It was filled with the echo of their shared vulnerability, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. Logan brushed a strand of hair from Callie's face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice a mix of concern and awe. Callie smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. "More than okay," she whispered, her hand resting against his chest. "I'm right where I want to be." When they finally pulled apart, Logan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "Callie," he murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "What are we doing?" She smiled faintly, her fingers still curled in his shirt. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't want to stop." Logan nodded, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "Then we won't." They sat there as the stars emerged, the weight of their choice settling over them. It wasn't simple, and it wasn't easy, but for the first time, it felt right. The days that followed their shared night of passion were a blend of unspoken glances and fleeting touches, each one charged with an intensity neither Callie nor Logan could deny. The boundaries they had so carefully maintained were no longer just blurred. They had dissolved entirely, yet despite the fiery connection between them, there was an undeniable tenderness in how they navigated their newfound intimacy. It was a warm evening, the kind that made the town seem even quieter than usual. Callie found herself walking through the orchard behind the house, her bare feet brushing against the cool grass. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of amber and pink, the soft light filtering through the leaves creating a serene atmosphere. She stopped near the old wooden swing Logan had fixed weeks ago, its rope swaying gently in the breeze. Her thoughts were swirling with everything that had happened. The way Logan looked at her now, like she was the only person in the world, left her heart racing. Yet, the nagging whispers of guilt and doubt crept in as well. Could they really keep this hidden? Could they sustain this connection in a world that wouldn't understand? As if drawn by her thoughts, Logan appeared at the edge of the orchard, his silhouette backlit by the golden glow of the setting sun. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his hands were tucked into his pockets as he approached her. There was an ease in his stride, but his eyes held the same intensity that always left her breathless. "Callie?" he called softly, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of cicadas. She turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. "Logan," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped a few steps away, his gaze scanning her face as if trying to read her thoughts. "You've been quiet all day. Is everything okay?" She hesitated, unsure of how to voice the turmoil in her heart. I've been thinking." "About us?" he asked, stepping closer. Callie nodded, her eyes meeting his. "What happens now? Logan, we crossed a line, and it's amazing. But it's terrifying, too." Logan reached out, his fingers brushing against hers before taking her hand fully in his. "I know it's complicated," he admitted. "But what I feel for you, Callie, it's real. It's not something I can just walk away from." His words sent a shiver through her. She stepped closer, their bodies mere inches apart. "I feel the same way," she confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I don't want this to hurt us, or anyone else." Logan's gaze softened, and he cupped her cheek gently. "We'll figure it out, together. I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. I'm not letting this go." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. Slowly, Callie leaned into him, their foreheads touching as they shared the quiet intimacy of the moment. His thumb brushed against her cheek, and she closed her eyes, letting herself be consumed by the warmth of his touch. "I trust you, Logan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. His lips curled into a soft smile. "And I trust you, Callie." The tension between them shifted, no longer a source of uncertainty, but a bond that anchored them. Logan tilted her chin upward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both tender and consuming. It was as if they were sealing an unspoken promise to navigate whatever lay ahead, together. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, Callie and Logan remained entwined under the canopy of the orchard. Their whispered confessions and stolen kisses became a sanctuary, a testament to the undeniable connection they shared. But as the night deepened, a sense of anticipation lingered. The world beyond the orchard loomed large, and with it, the challenges they would inevitably face. For now, though, they chose to savor the moment, knowing that their love, however unconventional, was worth fighting for. The days rolled into weeks, each one marked by the stolen moments Callie and Logan shared. Their bond grew deeper, their connection stronger, and with each passing day, the weight of their secret felt both heavier and more worth it. But life had a way of forcing decisions when they were least expected. One crisp autumn morning, Callie stood in the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Logan entered, his hair still damp from the shower, and their eyes met with the kind of warmth that spoke volumes without a single word. As they shared breakfast, a knock at the door broke the tranquility. Callie glanced at Logan, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "Are we expecting anyone?" Logan shook his head. "No one I know of." Callie moved to open the door. her heart skipping a beat when she saw who was standing on the porch. A woman, strikingly beautiful, with auburn hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her sharp green eyes softened slightly when she saw Callie's confusion. "Hello," the woman said, her voice smooth yet laced with something Callie couldn't quite place. "You must be Callie." Yes," Callie replied hesitantly. "And you are." The woman smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Joanna, Logan's wife." The words hit Callie like a freight train. Her breath caught, and she instinctively stepped back, her mind racing. Wife. How could Logan not have told her? How could she not have known? Logan appeared behind her, his expression freezing the moment he saw Joanna. "Joanna." His voice was laced with shock, but Callie caught the undercurrent of guilt. Joanna crossed her arms, her gaze flickering between them. "Surprised to see me. Logan. I'm sure you are. It took some time, but I finally decided I needed answers." Callie felt her stomach churn as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "You're married," she whispered, her voice shaking. Logan turned to her, his face etched with regret. "Callie, I can explain." "Explain," Joanna interrupted, her voice sharp. "Please, Logan, enlighten us both. I'd love to hear how you plan to explain this." Callie felt a surge of emotions: betrayal, anger, heartbreak. She stepped away from Logan, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield herself from the weight of the truth. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All this time. Logan, you lied." "Callie, I didn't mean for this to happen," Logan said, desperation coloring his voice. "Joanna and we've been separated for over a year. I didn't think—" "You didn't think I deserved to know," Callie shot back, her voice trembling. "That I deserved the truth." Joanna's gaze softened, but her tone remained firm. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I just wanted to see for myself what I was dealing with. Logan, if you've moved on, just say it. But don't leave people in the dark." Logan's shoulders slumped, the weight of his choices visibly bearing down on him. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he said, his voice low. Callie shook her head, the emotions overwhelming her. "You didn't just hurt anyone. Logan, you hurt me." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Joanna looked at Callie, her expression unreadable, before turning back to Logan. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," she said. "We need to talk." With that, she walked away, leaving Logan and Callie standing in the doorway, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. Callie turned to Logan, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't do this. Logan? Not like this." "Callie, please," Logan said, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "I need time," she said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "I can't be with someone who isn't honest with me." Logan watched helplessly as she walked away, her silhouette fading into the golden light of the orchard, the love they had shared, the connection that had felt so right, now hung in the balance. As Callie retreated to her room, her mind spinning with emotions, she found an envelope on her bedside table. Her name was scrawled in Logan's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it to find a letter. "Callie, I never wanted to keep anything from you. Joanna and I were over long before I met you. But I know I should have told you. Please know that what I feel for you is real. I've made mistakes, but losing you would be the biggest one of all. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Yours, Logan." Callie clutched the letter to her chest, her emotions a whirlwind. She didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of their story.